My name is Evelyn Carter, and I'm 32 years old. For 3 years, I was with a man named Adrian. He was 29, handsome in that polished, camera-ready way that made strangers trust him too quickly, and for a long time, I mistook that ease for substance. He was charming, funny, magnetic even. He knew how to fill a room. He knew how to make people lean in when he spoke. He also knew how to make me feel lucky for being chosen by him. That was the lie that kept the relationship alive long after it should have died. By the final year, I wasn't really his girlfriend anymore. I was his translator, his excuse maker, the soft place where all his sharpness landed without consequence. If Adrian was rude, I smoothed it over. If he crossed a line, I explained what he really meant. If he sulked, I adjusted the whole mood around him as if I were managing a stage and he was the star. I spent so much time protecting his ego that I stopped noticing how little room was left for my own. The worst part was that none of it looked dramatic from the outside. He never had to scream to control a room. He did it with timing, with tone, with a little laugh after something cruel. He could place a hand on the small of my back while saying something that reduced me in front of other people. He was careful enough to stay charming, and I was conditioned enough to call it love. The signs had always been there. The way he corrected me in front of friends, like I was adorable but slightly incompetent. The way he compared me to other women when he wanted to unsettle me, then acted affectionate as if that erased the insult. The way every argument bent back toward my failure to appreciate him enough. For a long time, I thought that if I became calmer, kinder, less reactive, more understanding, things would settle. Instead, my patience became part of the architecture of his arrogance. The more I tolerated, the more certain he became that I always would. The end came on a Thursday. Nothing cinematic, no shattered glass, no thunderstorm outside the windows, just soft yellow light in our bedroom, the smell of my perfume in the air, and Adrian standing in front of the mirror adjusting the collar of his shirt like the night was a performance he had already won. We were supposed to meet friends for dinner. I was sitting on the edge of the bed fastening an earring when he caught his own reflection and smiled at himself. Not at me, at himself. Then he said, in that lazy conversational tone he used when he thought his cruelty was too polished to count as cruelty, "You've gotten so complacent, Evelyn." I looked up. "What?" He kept straightening his cuffs. "You're lucky to have me. Do you even realize that other women would kill to be where you are?" He let that sit for a second, then added lightly, "You should be grateful." That sentence should have broken my heart. Instead, it opened a door. Sometimes pain becomes so familiar that it stops feeling sharp and starts feeling structural, like it has been built into the walls around you. Then one day, someone says the quiet part out loud, and suddenly everything becomes visible, not worse, just clear. That's what happened to me. I stared at him in the mirror, at his self-satisfaction, at the certainty in his face. He really believed that was a reasonable thing to say to the woman he claimed to love. He believed I would absorb it the way I always had, maybe cry, maybe go quiet, maybe spend the rest of the evening trying to earn back tenderness he had no intention of giving. But something inside me had gone still. Not numb, not shattered. Still. I stood up slowly. He noticed the silence, and for the first time his expression shifted. Not much, just a flicker. A small disturbance in the reflection. I met his eyes and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had finally understood the terms of a contract she never should have signed. "And let them try," I said softly. His brow tightened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're right." That got his full attention. I pulled my overnight bag from the closet and unzipped it. His voice sharpened immediately. "Evelyn!" I folded 2 sweaters and placed them inside, then my charger, a toiletry pouch, my laptop. He turned away from the mirror. "What are you doing?" "I'm done, Adrian." The room changed. 1 second, it had been his stage, all polished confidence and controlled contempt. The next, the air felt thinner and more real. He looked at me like I had started speaking a language he didn't understand. "You're breaking up with me?" he asked. "Yes." "Over that?" He laughed once, short and disbelieving. "Are you serious right now?" "No," I said, glancing at him as I zipped the side pocket of my bag. "Not over that, because of what that says." He stared at me. Then the anger rose exactly where I knew it would, over the part of him that couldn't tolerate being interpreted correctly. "Oh my God," he snapped. "You are so insecure." I didn't answer. "That was a joke." "No, it wasn't." "You're really throwing away 3 years because your feelings got hurt?" I slid my phone into my purse. I'm leaving because I'm not interested in auditioning for Basic Respect anymore. His mouth fell open for half a second. That line hit harder than I expected, maybe because I hadn't raised my voice, maybe because it sounded too much like the truth. Then came the escalation. I was dramatic. I was unstable. I was making a fool of myself. I was going to regret this by morning. He paced the room while he spoke, one hand braced on his hip, the other cutting through the air like he was cross-examining me in a courtroom where he had already appointed himself judge. "I'm the best thing that's ever happened to you," he said. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something almost like grief. Not for the relationship, for how long I had believed him. "I used to think that too," I said quietly. That landed. The color in his face changed. "You're unbelievable." I slung the bag over my shoulder and walked toward the door. He followed me into the hallway, still talking, still throwing out words like hooks. When he realized none of them were catching, his tone changed. It got colder, smaller, more precise. "Fine," he said, "go." I reached for the handle. Then he delivered the line he thought would bring me to heel. "But don't forget Liam and Chloe's engagement party on Saturday," he said. "You really want to do this now? Show up alone 2 days later and let everyone see what happened? That's going to be humiliating, Evelyn." I turned back. There it was. The real fear, according to Adrian. Not losing him. Looking rejected in public. Being seen as the woman who got left behind. He still thought shame was the leash. I studied his face for a moment, and I could tell he thought he had found the nerve. He expected hesitation, softening, maybe even a retreat. Instead, I said, "I'll be there." His expression flickered. "Don't worry about me." Then I opened the door and left. I checked into a hotel 20 minutes later. The room was quiet, expensive enough to feel anonymous, and colder than I needed it to be. I stood by the window for a long time with my shoes still on, looking down at the streetlights below and waiting to feel devastated. What I felt was exhausted. And underneath that, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. My phone lit up 3 times in 10 minutes. Adrian calling. Then again. Then again. I blocked him after the 5th attempt. Then I made 2 calls. The first was to my landlord. The lease on the apartment had always been solely in my name. Adrian used to joke that it was our place with my taste and your paperwork, which should have told me everything I needed to know. I explained calmly that my boyfriend and I had broken up, that he would need to move out, and that I intended to change the locks on Monday. The landlord didn't hesitate. "That's fine, Evelyn. Just send me the written notice for the file." Simple, clean, legal. My second call took longer. Not because I didn't know who to call, because I knew exactly who I wanted to call, and that scared me more. His name was Julian Brooks. We'd met a few months earlier on a branding project between my company and an outside design team. He was a graphic designer, quick-witted, observant, impossible to rattle, the kind of man who listened all the way to the end of your sentence before answering. There had been a spark there when we met. Not an affair, not even close, just a flicker I had noticed and then ignored because I was still trying to make my relationship look alive. Standing in that hotel room with city lights spilling across the carpet, I opened my messages and stared at his name longer than I want to admit. Then I typed, "Hey, Julian. This is incredibly last minute and slightly unhinged, so feel free to say no, but my plans for Saturday night changed dramatically. Any chance you'd want to be my +1 to an engagement party?" I read it twice before sending. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Well, that's the most interesting invitation I've gotten all week. Are you okay?" I smiled for the first time that night. I answered honestly, but not completely. "Fresh breakup. He'll be there. It may be awkward." His reply came almost immediately. "A little awkward is well within my skill set. Pick me up at 7? I stared at the screen and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Adrian thought Saturday would be my humiliation. He had already decided what role I would play. What he didn't understand was that I was finally done reading from the script he wrote for me. And for the first time in years, that felt like the beginning of something instead of the end. Julian was waiting outside his building when I pulled up on Saturday night. He was leaning against the curb under a street lamp, jacket open, one hand in his pocket, like he had stepped out of a scene that knew exactly what it was doing. He looked clean, composed, effortless, in a way that didn't feel performative. When he opened the passenger door and got in, the car filled with the faint scent of cedar and something warm I couldn't name. He glanced over at me, studied my face for half a second, then said, "You look incredible." It was such a simple sentence, no agenda hidden inside it, no test, no edge, just a man telling the truth as he saw it. I laughed softly and pulled away from the curb. "Thank you for agreeing to this." "Please," he said, settling into the seat. I canceled a very serious evening with leftover pasta and a documentary I was pretending to enjoy. That made me laugh again, and the tension in my shoulders loosened a little. The drive to Liam and Chloe's engagement party was easier than I expected. I had prepared myself for awkwardness, for forced conversation, for the brittle politeness of two people pretending not to notice the emotional landmine sitting between them. But Julian had a way of making silence feel comfortable and conversation feel effortless. He didn't pry. He didn't ask for a full debrief on my breakup. He gave me room to breathe, then filled that room with wit at exactly the right moments. By the time we turned onto Liam and Chloe Street, I had almost forgotten to be nervous. Almost. The house was glowing when we arrived. Warm, amber light spilling from the windows, laughter floating into the crisp evening air. Cars lined both sides of the street. Through the backyard gate, I could already hear music, glasses clinking, the bright bursts of overlapping voices. I parked and switched off the engine. For a second, neither of us moved. Julian looked at me, not with pressure, just attention. Last chance to fake a flat tire. I smiled, but it came out thinner than I wanted. He thinks I'm coming here alone. Julian nodded once. Then I suppose we shouldn't disappoint him too gently. I turned to him fully then, taking him in under the dim cabin light. Dark suit, no tie, calm eyes. The kind of face that looked better the longer you looked at it, because it was animated by something Adrian had always lacked, ease without vanity. You really don't have to do anything dramatic, I said. Just be yourself. That's good, he said. I'm excellent at that. Then he got out, came around the front of the car, and opened my door before I could reach for the handle. It was a small gesture, but it landed somewhere deeper than it should have. Adrian used to make grand gestures in public when he wanted admiration. Julian did quiet things when no one was watching. As we walked toward the backyard gate, I felt my pulse start to climb. Adrian had left our apartment convinced humiliation would herd me back into place. In his mind, I would either stay home and prove him right, or I would show up alone, looking shattered, and spend the night shrinking under sympathetic glances. He had already written the scene. He just hadn't imagined I might revise it. The party was already in full swing when we stepped into the yard. Liam stood near the grill with a drink in one hand and his other arm looped around Chloe's waist. Groups of friends clustered around patio heaters and low tables, everyone glowing under string lights and champagne. The whole thing looked soft and celebratory from a distance, but the second I entered, I could feel the invisible architecture of social attention shifting. Not everyone noticed us right away, but someone did. I spotted Adrian within 30 seconds. He was standing near the fire pit with Sarah and Ben, one hand wrapped around a glass, body angled outward the way he always stood when he wanted to look casual and be observed at the same time. He was mid-story, animated, smiling, surrounded by exactly the kind of audience that used to make him feel invincible. Then his eyes lifted, and the story died in his mouth. Even from across the yard, I saw it happen. The freeze, the disorientation, the microscopic pause before his face rearranged itself into something harder, more controlled. He looked at me first, then at Julian, then back at me, like the math refused to settle. Beside him, Sarah looked instantly alert. Ben didn't look smug the way she did. He looked unsettled, like he was already realizing this wasn't the story Adrian had sold them. Beside me, Julian leaned in just enough to murmur, "I'm guessing that's him." "Mm-hmm." He glanced again. He has the expression of a man who just found out the building he set on fire had his own office upstairs. Despite myself, I almost smiled. We didn't go near Adrian right away. That was important. Instead, we made a slow, easy entrance into the party. We greeted Liam and Chloe first. Chloe lit up when she saw me and pulled me into a quick hug, telling me how happy she was that I came. Liam shook Julian's hand, instantly liking him in the unforced way decent men recognize other decent men. We took drinks. We moved through the yard. We spoke to two other couples I knew from college. Julian was exactly what he had been in the car. Warm, observant, funny, without trying too hard. People relaxed around him instantly. That was the thing Adrian never understood. He thought presence came from domination. It doesn't. Sometimes it comes from making other people feel at ease. Within minutes, I could feel the weight of Adrian's stare like heat between my shoulder blades. I didn't turn immediately. I let him watch. When I finally glanced over, Sarah was whispering something to him. Adrian's jaw had tightened so hard it almost changed the shape of his face. Then he started walking toward us. Of course he did. He would never allow a disruption to exist without trying to reclaim control of it. Julian saw him coming and took a slow sip of his drink. Do you want me to say something devastating and beautifully phrased? He asked quietly. Or should I just stand here looking expensive? That got a real laugh out of me. Let me handle it. As you wish. Adrian reached us wearing a smile so polished it would have been convincing to anyone who had never loved him. Evelyn, he said, his voice dipped in artificial sweetness. I didn't realize you were still coming. There it was, the first lie of the conversation. He had expected me to come. He had just expected me to come diminished. I said I would, I replied evenly. His gaze shifted to Julian in a quick, assessing sweep. And you brought someone. Julian extended his hand with easy politeness. Julian. Adrian looked at it for a beat too long before shaking it. Adrian. His eyes came back to me. That was fast. The words were mild. The tone was not. It was crafted to be overheard. Not a direct accusation, just enough insinuation to invite judgment from anyone close enough to listen. Same game, new setting. I felt the old reflex flicker inside me, the instinct to soften the moment, to explain, to make everyone comfortable. Then I remembered I didn't work for him anymore. You were very clear on Thursday, I said calmly. His expression shifted, just slightly. I continued before he could interrupt. You said other women would kill to have you. I tilted my head a fraction. I decided to stop being grateful and let them try. The air around us changed. It was immediate. Sarah, who had drifted closer under the pretense of passing by, stopped moving. Ben blinked. Two people from Liam's side of the party looked over at the sudden silence. Even Adrian's posture changed, like the floor had moved under him. Because he recognized the words. They were his. And that was the beauty of it. I hadn't insulted him. I hadn't invented anything. I had simply returned his arrogance to him in public and let it sound the way it had always sounded. Ugly. That's not what I meant, he said too quickly. It's exactly what you meant. Evelyn. No, I said, still quiet. You don't get to turn it into a misunderstanding now that other people heard it. A flush rose under his skin, blotchy and uneven. He forced a laugh, but it cracked in the middle. You're really doing this here? I met his eyes. You did it first. I'm just being accurate. For one suspended second, I thought he might actually say something reckless enough to expose himself completely. I could see the anger pushing up through the thin surface of his social mask, the need to punish, the need to reassert, the need to remind me who he thought I was supposed to be. But Julian moved then, not aggressively, not even obviously. He just stepped half an inch closer to my side, one hand sliding lightly into his pocket, calm as still water. It wasn't possessive, it wasn't performative, it was simply presence. And Adrian noticed. He noticed that I wasn't alone. He noticed that I wasn't nervous. He noticed that another man was standing next to me without strain, without insecurity, without trying to win. It unsettled him more than any insult could have. I offered Adrian a small, almost sympathetic smile. Now, if you'll excuse us, I think Liam is about to make a toast. Then I turned away. Not dramatically, not rushed, just decisively. Julian followed my lead as if we had rehearsed it, and together we moved toward the center of the yard, leaving Adrian standing in a pocket of silence he had not prepared for. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Julian leaned closer as we walked. That, he said softly, was exquisite. I exhaled a shaky breath. I thought I was going to pass out. You didn't. No. You made him look exactly like what he is, Julian said, and you didn't even raise your voice. That line stayed with me through Liam's toast, through the applause, through the clinking of glasses, and the soft swell of music that followed. Because it was true. For years, Adrian's power depended on interpretation, on tone, on social choreography, on making me seem emotional if I reacted and ungrateful if I didn't. But once his words were dragged into clear light, stripped of charm and timing, they became what they had always been. Contempt. Later, when Julian stepped inside to help Liam carry out another tray of champagne, Sarah cornered me near the side fence. She came in with her arms folded and concern arranged on her face like makeup. This is cruel, she said quietly. I took a sip of sparkling water and looked at her. What is? You know exactly what. Her eyes flicked toward the house where Julian had disappeared inside. Showing up with someone else like this? After everything, Adrian is devastated. The sentence almost made me laugh. Not because heartbreak isn't real, but because entitlement so often gets mistaken for heartbreak when it happens in expensive clothes and the right tone of voice. Did Adrian tell you why we broke up? I asked. Sarah hesitated. He said you overreacted to a comment and threw him out. Interesting. He said you've been cold for months and finally snapped. I nodded slowly. Did he mention that he told me I should be grateful to have him because other women would kill to be with him? Sarah's expression faltered. He was upset. He was arrogant. You know he didn't mean it like that. He meant it exactly like that. Sarah looked frustrated now, like I was refusing to follow the emotional map she had prepared. You're supposed to be the bigger person. There it was. The phrase handed to the wounded person whenever everyone is more comfortable with their endurance than their boundary. I set my glass down on the ledge beside me. I was the bigger person, I said, for 3 years. Sarah opened her mouth, but I kept going. I absorbed his moods. I softened his cruelty. I apologized for things I didn't do just to keep the peace. I kept making room for behavior that should have ended this relationship long before Thursday. So no, Sarah, I'm not interested in being the bigger person anymore. She stared at me. I could see the conflict in her face, not full understanding, not yet, but disruption, the beginning of it. Adrian is hurting, she said finally, but the conviction was weaker now. I nodded once. So was I. The difference is, I stopped calling it love. That landed. She had no answer for it. She stepped back a little, her gaze drifting toward the crowd, where Adrian was now laughing too loudly at something Ben said, already trying to glue his image back together with charm and volume. But I had watched enough of him to know when a performance was failing. The smile didn't reach his eyes. The looseness in his body was gone. Every few seconds, his attention snapped back to me. To us. When Julian returned, he handed me a fresh drink and murmured, I leave for 4 minutes, and you start emotionally outclassing entire social circles. Occupational hazard. He smiled. We stayed another hour, long enough for the yard to finish adjusting to the new reality, long enough for people to stop looking at Adrian first and start looking at me without pity, long enough for his original script to die completely. As the night thinned and people began gathering coats and saying their goodbyes, Julian and I headed toward the gate. We had almost made it out when Adrian's voice cut across the party behind us, sharp enough to turn heads. It's pathetic, honestly, he said loudly. Rebound relationships never last. She'll come crawling back when she realizes what she lost. A few conversations stumbled into silence. He wanted an ending. One last public stab. One last chance to make me flinch. One last scene where I proved I still belonged inside his gravity. I stopped walking. Julian glanced at me, but didn't touch my arm, didn't guide me, didn't intervene. He trusted me to decide. I turned halfway back, just enough for my voice to carry. No, Adrian, I said. What I lost was the habit of tolerating you, and I'm not interested in finding it again. The silence that followed was clean and total. I held his gaze for 1 beat longer, then turned and walked out through the gate beside Julian without another word. This time I didn't feel humiliated. I felt free, and behind me, for the first time since I had known him, Adrian was the one left standing in front of everyone with nothing convincing left to say. The silence Adrian left behind that night didn't follow me home. It followed him. I didn't realize it immediately. On Sunday morning, all I felt was the aftermath, that strange quiet that comes after you've done something irreversible. I woke up in my apartment alone for the first time in 3 years, sunlight spilling across a room that suddenly felt different. Not empty, unclaimed. My phone was face down on the nightstand. I didn't rush to check it. That alone told me how much had changed. When I finally flipped it over, there were 12 missed calls. Not from Adrian. From Sarah, 2 from an unknown number, and 1 voicemail that had been transcribed automatically. You don't get to walk away like that. I stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without listening. Block. Block. Done. For a few hours, nothing happened. I made coffee. I opened the windows. I walked through the apartment slowly, noticing small things I hadn't seen in months, the way the light hit the kitchen counter in the morning, the exact spot where the floor creaked near the hallway, the silence that no longer felt like something waiting to be filled. Then the second wave hit. It started with a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in weeks. Hey, I saw Adrian's post. Are you okay? I frowned. Post? I opened Instagram. There it was. A black and white photo of him sitting alone, head tilted down, one hand pressed against his forehead, like he was carrying something unbearably heavy. The caption was vague enough to be harmless, but pointed enough to do damage. Sometimes the people you give everything to are the ones who walk away when you need them most. Healing isn't linear. The comments were already filling up. Stay strong. You deserve better. Some people don't appreciate what they have. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not pain. Recognition. This wasn't heartbreak. This was narrative control. Adrian wasn't trying to process the breakup. He was trying to frame it, position himself as the one who had been abandoned, the one who had been wronged. the one who deserves sympathy. And it was working, at least on the surface. A few familiar names popped up in the comments. People who only saw the polished version of him. People who had never been on the receiving end of his casual cruelty. People who believed that confidence always meant strength. I scrolled for exactly 10 seconds, then closed the app. I didn't comment. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. Because for the first time, I understood something I hadn't before. If I stepped into that space, I would be playing his game again. And I was done performing. The messages didn't stop. They just changed form. By Monday afternoon, they were coming from his orbit instead of him directly. Sarah again. Then Ben. Then someone I barely spoke to outside of group settings. Each one carrying the same underlying message, dressed up in different words. You're being too harsh. He's not handling this well. Maybe you should talk to him. You don't have to do this publicly. Publicly. That word almost made me laugh. As if I had been the one staging scenes. As if I had been the one delivering lines designed to humiliate. As if I had been the one who needed an audience to feel powerful. I didn't answer any of them. Not because I didn't have responses. Because none of them were owed one. By Tuesday, the tone shifted again. From persuasion to pressure. My phone rang at 11:18 a.m. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Then something in my gut told me to answer. Hello? A pause. Then a voice I recognized immediately, even though I had only heard it a handful of times. Cold. Controlled. Disapproving by default. Evelyn. Cassandra. Adrian's mother. Of course. I leaned back in my chair, already tired. What can I do for you? What you can do, she said smoothly, is stop behaving like this. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her repeat herself. Excuse me? You know exactly what I mean, she continued. Adrian is going through something difficult, and instead of supporting him, you're making a spectacle out of it. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was again. The expectation. Not that I be fair. Not that I be honest. That I be useful. To who? I asked calmly. To him, she snapped. To the relationship you just threw away. I didn't throw anything away. You walked out, she said sharply. Over a comment. Over a pattern. Don't be dramatic. That word again. It was interesting how often boundaries got labeled as drama by people who benefited from you having none. He told me I should be grateful to be with him, I said, my voice still level, that other women would kill to be in my position. A pause. Then, dismissively, men say things. I almost smiled. Of course they do. And apparently, according to Cassandra, women were supposed to absorb them quietly. You're making him look weak, she added, her tone tightening, and that reflects poorly on you. There it was. Not concern. Reputation. Control. Image. Everything suddenly made sense in a way it hadn't before. Adrian didn't invent this mindset. He inherited it. I'm not responsible for how he looks, I said. I'm responsible for what I tolerate. You're being selfish. I'm being done. Her breath sharpened on the other end of the line. You can't just cut him off like this. He needs closure. I leaned forward slightly, my fingers resting against the edge of my desk. He had closure, I said, on Thursday, when he told me exactly how he sees me. That's not what he meant. It's exactly what he meant. You're twisting it. No, I said quietly. I'm finally hearing it. Another pause. Longer this time. Then she shifted tactics. If you cared about him at all, you wouldn't be doing this. That one almost landed. Not because it was true. Because it used to be. I used to care enough to stay quiet, to smooth things over, to make his behavior easier for everyone else to accept. But caring without boundaries isn't love. It's permission. I did care, I said. That's why I stayed as long as I did. And now? Now I care about myself more. The line went completely silent. For a moment, I thought she might actually hang up. Instead, her voice came back colder than before. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said, but it's mine. Then I ended the call, blocked the number, and sat there for a long time staring at my phone. Not shaken, not regretful, just aware. The pattern was bigger than I thought. Adrian hadn't just been confident. He had been reinforced, protected, enabled. And now, for the first time, that system didn't have access to me anymore. The real escalation came on Wednesday. It didn't come through a text, or a call, or a post. It came through my work email. Subject, formal complaint. My stomach dropped. I opened it and felt something colder than fear settle in my chest. An anonymous complaint had been filed. It accused me of using company resources for personal projects, of behaving aggressively in meetings, of creating a hostile work environment. The language was careful, specific enough to sound legitimate, vague enough to be difficult to disprove instantly. But I didn't need proof to know where it came from. Adrian. He had moved from social pressure to professional damage, and that changed everything. I sat there for exactly 30 seconds, reading the email twice. Then I stood up, grabbed my notebook, and walked straight to my boss's office. No hesitation, no panic. Because the moment he crossed into my work life, this stopped being emotional and became consequential. Richard looked up as I knocked lightly and stepped inside. "Evelyn, I need to speak with you," I said, in HR. Something in my tone must have landed because he didn't ask questions. He just nodded. "Let's go." An hour later, I was sitting across from Linda, the head of HR, with Richard beside me. The complaint sat printed on the table between us. I didn't defend myself immediately. I didn't get emotional. I didn't react the way Adrian expected me to. Instead, I started with the truth. "My ex-boyfriend and I broke up last week," I said. "It was not amicable." Linda and Richard exchanged a glance. "This complaint," I continued, tapping the paper lightly, "is retaliation." Linda leaned forward slightly. "That's a serious claim." "I know." I opened my notebook and slid a page across the table. A date. 6 months ago. A short entry written after a fight I had almost forgotten. "If you ever try to leave me, I will make sure you regret it. I'll call your boss. I'll make them think you're unstable." I watched their expressions change as they read it. "He said that?" Richard asked quietly. "Yes." "And you documented it at the time?" "Yes." Linda sat back, her face tightening slightly. "We will still need to investigate the complaint." "I understand," I said, "and you should." Because I had nothing to hide. That was the difference. Adrian's entire strategy relied on chaos. Mine relied on clarity. By the time I left that room, one thing had become very clear. He wasn't trying to get me back. He was trying to punish me for leaving. And that meant he wasn't done. But neither was I. For the first time since Thursday, I felt something shift again. Not relief. Not freedom. Something sharper. Focus. Because he had just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. And whatever happened next wouldn't be handled quietly. The message came Thursday evening. Unknown number. I almost ignored it again. But something told me this one mattered. I opened it. "This is Adrian. I'm using Ben's phone. I'm coming to the apartment Saturday at noon to get my things." No question. No courtesy. Just a statement. A demand disguised as inevitability. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed back. "Saturday at noon is fine." Then I put my phone down and started planning. Friday morning, HR called me in. I already knew what they were going to say before I sat down. Linda's expression gave it away. Measured, professional, but no longer suspicious. "We've completed our initial investigation," she said. "There is no evidence supporting the complaint." Richard leaned back in his chair beside her. "Your logs are clean. Your work history is consistent. And the prior threat adds important context." Linda nodded. "We're classifying this as a malicious, non-work-related harassment attempt. It will be documented accordingly." The breath I had been holding all week finally left my body. Slow. Controlled, clean. The bomb Adrian tried to set under my career hadn't just failed. It had been exposed. Richard gave my shoulder a brief, steady squeeze as we stood. "You handled this exactly right." I met his eyes. "I'm not interested in letting it escalate." Linda closed the folder in front of her. "We'll make sure it doesn't." For the first time since Wednesday, I felt the ground fully settle beneath my feet again. He had tried to shake my foundation. Instead, he had revealed his own. Saturday morning, I woke up before my alarm. Not anxious, not angry. Focused. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about closure. Real closure. Not the kind Adrian wanted, where he talked until I softened. The kind where systems replaced feelings. I moved through the apartment slowly, checking everything one last time. By 9 a.m., the movers were already there. Professional. Efficient. Silent in the way people are when they've done this 100 times before. Every single one of Adrian's personal belongings had already been packed the night before. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, books, small items he had scattered across the space like proof of ownership. Now they were all reduced to identical cardboard boxes. Stacked, labeled, impersonal. The furniture was next. The oversized velvet couch he insisted on buying because it made a statement. The marble coffee table I had always hated but tolerated because he loved how it looked in photos. The abstract painting that cost more than my first car. Piece by piece, it was all removed. Not destroyed. Not hidden. Handled. By 11:30, the apartment felt like a different place. Echoing. Minimal. Mine again. At 11:45, the door opened. Julian stepped in carrying 2 pizza boxes like he had been doing it his entire life. He paused just inside, looking around. "Well," he said lightly, "this feels dramatically healthier." I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "Too much?" He set the boxes down and shook his head slowly. "No. This is clean." That word landed. Because it was exactly what it felt like. Not revenge. Not chaos. Clean. He glanced toward the stacked boxes. "He won't expect this." "No," I said, "he won't." Julian opened one of the boxes and pulled out 2 slices, handing one to me. Good. We stood there for a moment, eating in quiet. No tension, no urgency, just calm before impact. At exactly noon, the buzzer rang. Right on time, of course. I set the slice down, walked to the door, and opened it. Adrian stood there, flanked by Sarah, and his mother, Cassandra. His backup, his audience, his reinforcement. For a split second, none of them moved, because this wasn't the scene they expected. Adrian stepped inside first, that familiar smirk already forming on his face, until he saw the apartment. The empty spaces, the stacked boxes, the absence of everything he associated with control. The smirk disappeared instantly. "What is this?" he demanded. I stepped aside, letting them enter fully. "Your belongings," I said calmly, gesturing toward the boxes, "are packed." He turned slowly, scanning the room like something had been stolen from him. "Where's the couch?" "In storage." His head snapped back toward me. "Excuse me?" "I arranged for a storage unit," I said, walking to the table and picking up a folder. "The furniture is being held there for now. I also got a consignment estimate in case you want the shop to handle the sale." I handed it to him. He didn't take it. His mother did. Snatched it, actually. Her eyes moved quickly across the pages. Inventory lists, contact information, estimates, storage paperwork. "You're selling his furniture?" she snapped. "I'm not selling anything without his authorization," I corrected evenly. "I'm giving him a documented option. If he approves the consignment, the proceeds go to him minus the storage and service costs." Her head jerked up. "You're charging him for this?" "For the storage and professional handling, yes." Adrian finally grabbed the folder from her, flipping through it with growing agitation. "This is insane," he said. "You don't get to just decide this." "I didn't," I replied. "I secured the apartment, removed what wasn't mine to keep inside it, and gave you your options. What happens next is up to you." That landed harder than anything else I'd said so far. Because it wasn't emotional. It was factual. Sarah stepped forward, arms crossed tightly. "This is unnecessary, Evelyn." "No," I said, meeting her gaze. "This is organized." Adrian slammed the folder shut. "Cancel it." "You can decline it," I said. "All the contact information is there. The first month of storage is already paid. You're free to arrange pickup and transport yourself." He stared at me, really stared this time, like he was trying to find the version of me that used to bend, the version that would soften under pressure, the version that would turn this into a conversation instead of a process. But she wasn't there anymore, and he knew it. That's when Julian walked in, casually, like none of this had any weight on him at all. He held 2 plates in his hands and glanced between us like he had just stepped into a mildly inconvenient interruption. "Pepperoni or veggie?" he asked me. The effect was immediate. Adrian's entire posture changed. His shoulders tightened, his jaw locked. Because this, right here, was something he couldn't control. Julian wasn't intimidated. He wasn't reactive. He wasn't even particularly interested. He was just present. And that was enough. "You!" Adrian snapped, pointing at him. "You think this is funny?" Julian raised an eyebrow slightly. "I think it's Saturday." That almost made me smile. Adrian took a step forward. Too fast. Too aggressive. His hand knocked into one of the stacked boxes. It tipped. Fell. Burst slightly at the corner. Clothes spilled onto the floor. Something in me hardened, not emotionally, but decisively. "That's enough." My voice cut clean through the room. He froze. Everyone did. I stepped forward slowly, my gaze locked on his. "You have 5 minutes," I said, "to take your things and leave." Cassandra scoffed. "You can't be serious." "If anything else gets damaged," I continued, not looking at her, "I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing." Silence. Heavy, absolute, because now this wasn't a breakup. It was consequences. Adrian stared at me like he didn't recognize the person in front of him. 5 minutes, I repeated. Then I lifted my phone and started the timer. That broke them. The shift was immediate. The anger didn't disappear, but it lost its power, because now there was a clock, a boundary, a line they couldn't argue their way out of. Sarah moved first, grabbing one of the boxes with a frustrated huff. Cassandra followed, muttering under her breath. Adrian stood there for 1 second longer, then 2. Then he turned sharply and yanked another box into his arms. The next 5 minutes were chaos. Boxes scraped against walls, doors slammed open, footsteps rushed back and forth. No dignity, no control, just urgency. By the time the last box had been dragged out to the SUV, the entire performance had collapsed. They came back once more. Adrian stepped into the doorway, breathing hard. His expression twisted between anger and something else. Something weaker. "You think you've won?" he said. I didn't answer. "You look petty," he added. "Cold." Still nothing. Then his voice cracked slightly. "Why are you doing this?" There it was. Not dominance. Confusion. "I loved you," he said. I met his eyes. And for the first time, I didn't feel pulled. Not even a little. No, I said quietly. You loved controlling me. The words landed like a final cut. Clean, irreversible. His face shifted, searching, waiting for hesitation, for regret, for anything that looked like the woman he used to manage. He found nothing. Close the door on your way out, I said. He stood there for one more second, then turned, and slammed it behind him. The sound echoed through the empty apartment, then faded, and just like that, it was over. I stood there for a long moment, the silence settling back into place. Julian stepped beside me, setting the untouched plate down on the counter. You okay? He asked. I let out a slow breath. Yeah, and for the first time since Thursday, I meant it. The silence after the door slammed didn't feel empty. It felt finished, not because the pain had vanished, but because the argument was finally over. My life no longer needed one more sentence to explain him. Julian didn't rush to fill the space. He leaned back against the counter, arms loosely crossed, watching me the way someone watches a storm pass, not trying to stop it, just making sure it clears safely. You didn't raise your voice once, he said after a moment. I didn't need to. No, he agreed. You didn't. I looked around the apartment again. The echoes were still there, but they didn't bother me anymore. They felt temporary, like the space was waiting to be rebuilt, instead of haunted by what had been removed. Julian nodded toward the door. You know he's going to spin this. I know. And people are going to listen. I know. He studied my face carefully. Does that bother you? I thought about it. About the posts, the messages, the comments from people who only knew the curated version of Adrian, the one that never raised his voice at the right time, never crossed a line in a way that could be easily quoted, never looked like the villain in his own story. It used to, I said honestly. Not anymore. Julian tilted his head slightly. What changed? I stopped needing to be understood by people who weren't there. That seemed to land with him. Good answer, he said quietly. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came in layers. Slow, uneven, quietly persistent. By Monday, the social media narrative Adrian had started began to lose momentum. Not collapse. Not yet, but weaken. The problem with vague victim posts is that they depend on constant reinforcement, and Adrian couldn't help himself. He kept posting. Different angles, different captions, same underlying message. He had been wronged. He had been abandoned. He was healing. At first, people responded the way they always do. Sympathy, encouragement, support. But repetition has a way of exposing itself. By the third post, the tone in the comments started to shift. Not dramatically, just small things. Questions instead of affirmations. Silence where there used to be reassurance. More importantly, people stopped asking me what happened. They were starting to figure it out on their own. Sarah tried to hold the line. Of course she did. She texted me twice that week. Long messages, carefully worded, explaining Adrian's emotional state, encouraging me to handle things more privately, reminding me that relationships are complicated and breakups don't have to become whatever this had become. I read both messages. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to explain. And I wasn't interested in being managed anymore. The financial side unfolded more predictably. The storage company and consignment shop sent updates within days. The velvet couch sold first, then the marble table. Each time I transferred the money to Adrian's account exactly as agreed, minus the approved costs. No message, no commentary, just a clean transaction. Subject line: asset liquidation. Item number 1. Asset liquidation. Item number 2. Asset liquidation. Item number 3. Cold, impersonal, final. The first time I sent one, I half expected a response. Anger, accusation, something. But nothing came. And somehow that silence said more than any message could have. Because for the first time, he had nothing to argue with. No emotion to manipulate. No conversation to twist. Just numbers. And paperwork. The real shift came from somewhere I didn't expect. Ben. He showed up at my office on Thursday. Not inside. Outside. Waiting near the entrance like he wasn't entirely sure he should be there. I almost walked past him. Almost. But something in his posture, uneasy, conflicted, made me stop. Evelyn, he said when he saw me, straightening slightly. Do you have a minute? I checked the time. A few. We stepped to the side, out of the main flow of people. He hesitated, then rubbed the back of his neck. I wanted to talk to you about everything. I said nothing. Let him find his own way through it. I think, he started slowly, we got it wrong. I raised an eyebrow slightly. We? Me, Sarah, a few others. He exhaled. Adrian's version of things didn't line up. With what? I asked. He gave a small, humorless laugh. With how he's been acting. That didn't surprise me. Adrian had always been good at controlling first impressions. Not sustained pressure. What changed? I asked. Ben looked away for a second, then back at me. He doesn't stop. Meaning? The posts, the messages, the calls. His jaw tightened. He's not handling it. He's escalating. Of course he was. Control doesn't disappear when it's challenged. It adapts. It pushes harder. And Sarah? I asked. Ben hesitated. She's still trying to defend him, he admitted, but it's putting strain on things. That too didn't surprise me. Loyalty to someone like Adrian comes with a cost. Eventually, someone has to pay it. Ben looked at me carefully. I'm not here to take sides. You already did. That landed. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I did. Silence stretched between us. Then he said something I didn't expect. You handled it better than I would have. I studied his face. He meant it. Not as an apology. As an observation. I didn't handle him, I said. I stopped handling him. Ben let out a quiet breath. That's the part I think we didn't understand. No, I said, you didn't. He nodded once. Then, after a moment, for what it's worth, I don't think you were the problem. I held his gaze, then gave a small nod. Thank you. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was simply acknowledgement. And that was enough. By the end of the week, the apartment felt different again. Not just empty. Settled. Julian had started spending more time there. Not in a way that felt invasive, not replacing anything, just present. We didn't rush anything, didn't define it too quickly, didn't force meaning into moments that were still unfolding. We cooked. We talked. We sat in comfortable silence that didn't need to be filled. And slowly, almost without noticing, the space stopped feeling like somewhere I had survived something and started feeling like somewhere I was building something. One evening, as we sat on the floor eating takeout because I hadn't bought new furniture yet, Julian glanced around and said, You know, most people would have made this uglier. I know, I said. That was the point. I didn't want ugly. I wanted finished. He smiled slightly. That tracks. The last piece fell into place quietly. Almost too quietly. Richard mentioned it in passing during a meeting the following week. Our legal team reached out to one of our marketing vendors, he said, flipping through a report. There was an issue involving one of their employees making an unfounded complaint against someone here. My stomach tightened slightly. Not with fear, with recognition. They're handling it internally, he added, but it's not a good look for them. I kept my expression neutral, professional, but something inside me shifted, because I knew exactly who that employee was. Adrian had tried to damage my career. Instead, he had exposed himself to his own. And companies don't tolerate risk they didn't ask for, especially not the kind that comes with documented behavior. Richard moved on to the next topic. The meeting continued, but I barely heard the rest. Because for the first time since this all started, I understood something clearly. I hadn't taken anything from Adrian. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply stepped out of the system that protected him. And without that system, without me smoothing things over, absorbing impact, keeping his image intact, everything he had built on top of it was starting to crack. 6 months later, the silence had a different texture. Not sharp, not fragile. Stable. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel like something is missing, because nothing is. I didn't think about Adrian every day anymore. At first I had. Not in the way people expect. No late-night longing, no second-guessing, but in small, involuntary flashes. A sentence he used to say, a place we used to go. The echo of habits I hadn't realized were built around him. But those faded. Not because I forced them to, because they had nothing left to attach to. The structure was gone. And without it, memory became just that. Memory. The updates about him came the way they always do in situations like this. Secondhand, uninvited, unnecessary, but still informative. It started with Sarah, or rather the absence of her. She stopped reaching out completely about a month after the apartment incident. No more messages, no more attempts to mediate, no more careful explanations wrapped in concern. At some point, even she ran out of ways to defend something that kept getting harder to justify. I heard through Ben, briefly and only once, that things between them had become strained. Not because of me, because of Adrian. Because defending someone full-time has a cost. And eventually, people start noticing how much they're paying. The furniture finished selling 2 months in. Piece by piece, transaction by transaction. Each time I sent the money exactly as agreed. No delay, no message, no emotion. Just a clean digital record of something that used to belong to both of us and now belonged to neither. Adrian never responded. Not once. Not even to confirm receipt. At first, I thought that was stubbornness. Pride. Then I realized what it actually was. He didn't know how to engage with something he couldn't manipulate. There was no angle, no opening, no weakness to press. So he chose silence. For the first time in our entire relationship, he had no control over the conversation. The real consequence came quietly. the way real consequences usually do. Not in a dramatic collapse, but in a slow removal of support. Richard mentioned it again one afternoon, almost casually, while we were reviewing a project timeline. That situation with the vendor we talked about, he said, scrolling through something on his tablet. It's been resolved. I kept my tone neutral. Oh. They let him go, Richard said simply. No name, no detail, no dramatics, just a fact. But it landed like a final domino. Because I knew. Of course I knew. Adrian hadn't just made a mistake. He had made himself a liability. Not because he was emotional, but because he weaponized something companies take seriously. Reputation, trust, professional conduct. Once that trust cracks, there's no version of charm that can put it back together. Richard moved on to the next topic, but I stayed very still for a moment. Not because I felt satisfaction. Because I felt something else. Finality. The last thing I heard was from someone I didn't expect. Chloe. She invited me for coffee one afternoon. Just the two of us. No group, no overlap, just conversation. We sat by the window in a quiet cafe, sunlight cutting across the table between us. She stirred her drink for a moment, then looked at me. I wanted to tell you something, she said. I waited. He's not okay. I held her gaze. I assumed as much. She nodded slowly. He moved back in with his parents. That didn't surprise me. What about work? I asked. She hesitated. He's looking. Open to work. The phrase echoed in my mind without her needing to say it. Searching, rebuilding, explaining. For someone like Adrian, that wasn't just inconvenience. It was identity loss. What happened at the party, Chloe continued carefully, that was the first time I saw it. Saw what? She met my eyes directly. The gap between who he presented himself as and who he actually is. I didn't answer, because there was nothing to add. She smiled faintly. You didn't humiliate him. No, I said quietly. I didn't. You just stopped protecting him. Exactly. That was it. That was always it. I don't know when the apartment stopped feeling like a place I had to reclaim and started feeling like a place that was entirely mine. Maybe it was the day I replaced the couch, not with something expensive, but with something comfortable. Something I chose without thinking about how it would look to anyone else. Maybe it was the coffee table. The one Julian helped me carry up 3 flights of stairs because I refused to pay for delivery. I built that one myself. Not perfectly. There's a slight unevenness in one of the legs if you look closely, but I kept it that way. Because it reminded me of something I needed to remember. Not everything has to be polished to be solid. Julian and I never had a moment where we defined everything. No dramatic conversation. Now what do we talk under soft lighting? It just became, slowly, naturally, without negotiation, without performance. With him, I never had to measure my reactions, never had to soften my words to avoid triggering something fragile, never had to shrink so someone else could feel larger. It was easy, not because it lacked depth, because it lacked conflict that never should have been there in the first place. One night, as we sat on the couch, my couch now, he glanced at me and said, You know, most people would call that revenge. I shook my head. No, revenge would have been louder. He looked at me. So what was it? I thought about it for a second. Closure with paperwork, I said. That made him smile. Yeah, that sounds more like you. The last time I thought about Adrian in any meaningful way wasn't when I heard he lost his job or moved back home or disappeared from social media. It was much simpler than that. I was standing in my kitchen, making coffee, sunlight hitting the counter just right, and I realized something. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not an apology, not closure, not understanding, nothing, because I already had it. He didn't lose me. He lost the version of me that kept making his life easier. And for someone like Adrian, that was the only loss he ever really knew how to feel. I didn't push him off the pedestal. I didn't need to. I just stepped out from underneath it and let gravity do the rest.